Hello, welcome back. This is Andy255. This is part 2 of our Sparkler series. So once you watched part 1 and you got all the modeling done, we're going to go ahead and get the simulation started. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a particle effect at the end. Okay, and let's go ahead and hold down the space bar and go into end particles. Now if you don't have this set up, you can go in to your hotbox controls and just set it up for FX only. Okay, so I would suggest that keeps it nice and clean. So I'm going to go in here and go to end particles, and we need to make sure we're down in legacy particles. Okay, do not create a particle system through this. We want to stick with our legacy particles. So let's go ahead and create an emitter, and we're going to create a omni type emitter. Okay, we're going to keep all the default settings for now, and let's go ahead and create. Alright, so we don't see the particle, they're right here, so we're going to go ahead and pop that up here. Let's move that. Let's go ahead and open up our outliner, Windows outliner, and open that up. And you can see that I would highly recommend that you rename everything on your in your scene so you don't get anything mixed up. And we created an omni emitter and a particle system. Alright, so some of the knowledge that we've gained before will be used here. I'm going to hit the 4 key so we can see where the particle is actually being emitted. You want to do it right on top. You don't want it to be interfering with the stick itself. We want the particles to emit from this. We don't want them colliding inside, so we want that to be right at the end of this stick. Okay. Alright, so right now the particles are going to be introduced to the scene all over the place. So if I select that, you can see that that's what's happening. So we've got a good start, right? So you can see that this works really well for a sparkler system. So the omnidirectional will shoot out in all directions, and that's looking good. So let's go ahead and go back. And the emitter, let's go ahead and you can see that our channel editor is showing attributes, right? It's not showing all the attributes, but it's showing some of them. So you might like to just change things. You can see that the rate, the emitter rate is right here, so if we wanted to change the rate, the only thing that is basically locked out is the use rate per particle, rate pp, so on that. Okay, so I usually don't use the channel editor, but feel free to use it for small changes if you want to. Sometimes you'll see me doing it, so that's under the channel editor, but I'd like to go in, like do a control A, go into the attributes itself. So we got the emitter and the particle shape here, and we have them right there. Okay. Alright, so the omni emitter is shooting everything out, so we don't have to worry about direction. The emitter type can be changed, but I wouldn't do that. That causes issues. So after the fact that you've created it, and if you go in there and start changing things up, you could get undesirable results if you do that. So kind of choose the one right up off the top when you create it, so you don't have those undesirable results that you could be getting. Okay. Alright, so particles that are spread per second, and if we're at 24 frames per second, so you can see that if I have particles shooting out, okay, and every second, every 24 frames, so on frame 24 we've got 100 particles that are being emitted. Okay, we talked about that before, so keep that in mind. You can't really scrub particles, it doesn't work that way, so you have to kind of make sure that you're set up for particle system. So let's go into the preferences, and under time slider you can see that we have a frame rate of 24 frames per second. How many frames do we want? Well, let's start with I think we're gonna do at least 600 frames. Okay, let's get that set up, and then playback speed, we're gonna set it play every frame, and then we're gonna force it to play in real time, which means 24 frames times 1. Okay, that works good. Just go ahead and click on save. Right, so now we're forcing the particles to render out. Now, the only reason why this would run slower than this is if your video card is really struggling. Okay? Alright, so there's nothing we can really do about that. I suppose you could download drivers and install those updated drivers. You should be doing that anyway, but there's not much I can do. A lot of it comes from the graphics card speed. The CPU has a little bit to do with that, but if you're running off a laptop, you might be struggling with trying to get real time. Okay, you can see I'm hitting real time. You can see I've got that going on, and the only reason why I'm seeing that is because I went to display before and got that all set up. So let's see, display, heads up display going in there, and I think I've got frame rate. Okay, so I've got frame rate selected. Also, I should select polygon count too, so I can see the polygon count that I've got in here. Okay, so you can see I've got 492 faces, which is not a big scene. It's a very small scene, right? Okay, so we got particles. So the first thing we're going to do is, once we get the particles shooting out, I'm going to change these particles to something that's a little easier to see. I know you can see those because but it's difficult to see in here in the scene itself. So what I'm going to do is, let's go ahead and get to the point where we can get the particles so we can actually see them. Alright, so let's go ahead and go in there and shoot those out. And those are pretty uniform. Okay, so we've got the rate, we've got the speed in here. Okay, I'm not worried about speed just yet. We're gonna have to shoot that up a little bit faster, but we just need to see these a little bit better. Okay, so let's make those like red or something. Okay, so we can see those a little bit better. Well, if we go into the particle shape, we've got live forever. So let's just go ahead and go right down the list here. So we've got live forever, which just shouldn't happen. Just go random range, lifespan, so that would be 24 frames. We need that to be a little bit longer than that. So let's go ahead and set it up for something like 4. Okay, and random range, we want it to be randomized at 1. So now when we play it, okay, right, so now we're going to see, we're going to have at least, there we go, starts breaking apart. So that should be good. Okay. Alright, so we've got those, random range, collision attributes, we're not too worried about that. We've got render attributes. Okay, emission, random streaks, or stream seeds, but random attributes. Well, when we say sparkler, those things are being emitted pretty quickly, so you got a real long streak on there. So we don't want points. So we want, may want to do multi-streak. I'm going to do streak first. Let's do that, and click on current render type. All right, so now we're going to have to come out. And they're not going fast enough to get us the long streak, right? So that's under emitter. So let's go ahead and set that up, the speed to be something like 10. I think that's about right. Check that out. Yeah, just about right. Okay, so let's drop that down to 5 just for now so we can see them. They're 10 is actually going so fast we can't really see them. So that's what they look like. Okay, and they're going way outside. Okay, like that, which makes sense because there's no gravity on them yet. Okay, so streak. Tail size, because we want them to be a little bit longer, so do 2 on tail size. There we go. That looks better. And we're gonna crank that up probably a little bit better. Let's see how this looks so far. Right, so now we need to, let's add some color so they can really stick out so we can start seeing them in the scene. That makes it a little nicer to see, or easier to see, I should say. So we have to do that per particle. We have to add an attribute. Right now we have a lifespan per particle, but we don't have a opacity, or excuse me, a color. So we're going to add a color to those. Let's go click on color, click on add per particle attribute. Okay, looks good. Add attribute. So now we've got RGB per particle. So I'm going to right click over this and we're going to create a ramp. Okay. So I right clicked over it and created a ramp. Now I've got to go in here, right click over it again, and then go to edit ramp. Okay, so right now I just want to make the particles all look like they're red so we can see them a little bit better. That makes it a little bit nicer to see. So let's go ahead and click on that. So we're good with that. Let's go into here. Now we can see, definitely see the particles. Okay. Now let's go back under the particles, go back up, and streak line width. Let's just turn that up. There we go. Now we can really see it. Now I'm going to bring that back down. That does not look realistic, of course. Does not look realistic. But for now, we're going to do the line width so we can actually see it. All right, cool. So there we go. So now we've got something that is at line width we could see. Let's bring that down a little bit more. That's a little bit too much. Let's bring that down to 2 so we can just see it. There we go. Alright, cool. So there's a sparkler effect. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to bring that to 1 when we get it all finished. We may even have the detail size depending on how fast we want this to come out. Alright. So we've got a couple cool things that we want to happen. We want to add gravity so they just don't keep going. We've got we'll have to, once everything's done, we'll change the lifespan too, because we don't want that to live forever. So we've got to do a couple things first. We're going to add gravity. So click on the particle, and we're going to go to Fields and Solvers. I'm just holding down the space bar. So hold down the space bar, go to Fields and Solvers, and we want to click on gravity. Okay? We don't need to go into the option box. We can change those options later. Okay? The options are the magnitude and attenuation and the direction, of course. So we now have a sparkler. Okay, great. That the speed is not fast enough, but that's easy enough to change. Just go into emitter and turn the speed up to something like, let's try 8. So speed at 8 now. Let's go ahead and play that again. Okay, that's pretty good. It's still not fast enough, I think. I think we were pretty good at 10. Let's do 10. There we go. There, that's good. That's a lot better. Speed at 10. Okay. How far are they going? Alright, so I think the gravity needs, because of the speed, we've turned the speed up, the gravity needs to be pulling a little bit harder on the actual sparks from the sparkler. So let's go ahead and click on the gravity field and let's turn that up to something like 12. Magnitude at 12. Okay, that looks good. Something like that. Right. Okay, so now we've got sparks, and they're living way too long, so we don't need to have a long trail all the way down there like that. So let's go ahead and turn the lifespan. Let's go into the particle 1, the shape 1, and then turn the lifespan down to something like 2 and see how that looks. Okay. And we could probably go a little bit shorter than that. Let's go ahead and stop that, rewind it, and let's do 1. Okay, so let's go ahead and play that with the camera far away. There we go. That's much better. Alright, good. Okay, there's our sparkler. So far so good. Next thing we're going to change is we're going to change the emitter amount. So now we got the speed. Let's go ahead and start playing with the emitter amount. Let's do 500. Get this a little more dramatic. There we go. That looks better. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop here, and we'll go to the next section. We'll go to part 3, and we'll go ahead and add collision to all these.